Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Housing. I'm your host, Sarah Goldvine. On today's episode, we talk about building resilience in community housing. With increasing impacts of climate change, fires, and extreme heat, how can housing providers support tenants with building the relationships and support systems that communities need to thrive? We're joined for this conversation by Stacey Barter, Executive Director of Building Resilient Neighborhoods, and by BC Housing's own Alex Johnston, Manager, Tenant Engagement. They'll discuss an innovative pilot project to foster belonging in BC Housing directly managed buildings as part of the sustainability and resiliency strategy. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge that we're recording today's session on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and the Lekwungen-speaking peoples. I express my gratitude to their peoples, past and present. Also, for transparency, we are recording this episode in November of 2024, and the conversation reflects the priorities of that time. Stacey, Alex, welcome to Let's Talk Housing.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much.
Yeah. So maybe, Stacey, we can start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your organization and the work that you do to build resilience in community?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me today. So I'm the Executive Director of Building Resilient Neighborhoods. We're a nonprofit organization based in BC, and our name kind of says it all. Really, what we focus on is trying to build more resilient communities and neighborhoods. And more recently, we've been focusing a lot on multi-unit housing as communities where we can foster and increase resilience.
Thank you for that. And Alex, of course, your team is doing a lot of work with Stacey, and our audience will know about BC Housing, but I think they probably don't know a lot about what your team does here. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that your team leads at BC Housing?
Yeah, so I'm the Manager of Tenant Engagement, or one of three with our Housing and Health Services team here. And just in the past year, we have a brand new team within Health Services called Tenant Engagement Workers. So they're really doing a lot of this work and at the forefront of programming and tenant engagement and helping to create these resilient communities within our buildings.
Yeah. So for folks who don't know, you mentioned within our buildings. Can you tell us a little bit about BC Housing's directly managed buildings and what that looks like here in British Columbia?
Yeah. So we own and operate, I don't know the exact number, but probably in the Lower Mainland, roughly 35 to 4,000 units of directly managed housing, and then also elsewhere in the province. So these are buildings that we have our own staff at. So we are the landlords essentially, but we also, with our Housing and Health Services team, have supports on site for tenants, and that can look like tenant support workers or Housing and Health Services nurses or coordinators. So they're really focused on folks' health and also helping with those day-to-day things that they may need, such as filling out paperwork or pest control or other situations that can come up for our tenants. But we really saw a need, especially with the extreme heat being more prevalent these past few years, that we're doing more work around education and preparation with our tenants so they're more prepared and just safer during those events, as well as other emergencies or natural disasters that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's build on that a little bit, Alex. As you mentioned, BC Housing does manage. It's actually right now it's just over 5,000 around the province, but most of those units, as you mentioned, are here in the Lower Mainland. So when you think about for BC Housing, what does resilience mean? It's this big word. It can mean many different things. Can you tell us just a little bit about what that means for the buildings as well as for tenants?
For us, or how I see it, is that both our buildings and the tenants that live within them, and also the staff, are just more prepared. They're able to respond to challenges or emergencies that might come up. And then they can also recover and come back from them too, because we've not just with extreme heat and natural disasters, but unfortunately, we've also encountered other significant emergencies at some of our buildings, like fires or floods or things like that. So we're just trying to ensure that the people within these buildings have the tools that they need to be prepared and looked after, essentially, if there's something like this that occurs. And I think for specifically BC Housing and our tenants, that would look like more informed tenants, better prepared, just knowing about resources and what's in the community, being more connected to their neighbors, just so they feel like they have more of a toolkit and they're not so alone too. Like a lot of our tenants, especially our seniors, are living on their own. They have limited social connections and ties. So I think it's really important that we're taking this into account and trying to foster these positive relationships in our buildings to hopefully encourage them to help each other too. So they're looking out for their neighbors. They're aware of what's maybe coming up weather-wise or what could potentially happen if an emergency occurred. So I think that's our main goal and what we see as a resilient community looking like at our sites.
Right. Yeah. So it's about so much more than the building, right? Social networks, particularly for folks who might be facing barriers. Maybe Stacey, can you share a little bit? It's right in the name of your organization. How would you explain resilience, and specifically, what do you think the role is of resilience in housing at a time of some of the stresses that Alex spoke about?
Yeah. Thanks for that. I really liked how Alex summed that up. And I think what I would add, we tend to think of resilience as like these invisible muscles that we can build that serve us when times get tough. And certainly resilience, the ability to proactively respond when there's challenges, it's so important when there's emergencies. We're seeing that more and more, as Alex said. But also just those kind of chronic stresses that are around all the time, that resilience is more than just emergency preparedness. It can serve us with all kinds of challenges, whether that be, health challenges or challenges around food security, whatever the case may be. We're trying to create communities where people have the ability to respond and take care of each other. And I really liked that Alex emphasized that. I think in our years of working on building community resilience, the thing that we've come to focus on the most is the importance of those social connections that Alex was speaking about. We kind of call it the magic ingredient in building community resilience. The line we often use is when we're thinking about emergency preparedness, it's not just what's in our emergency kit, it's who is in our emergency kit. So how do we create really robust social ties and social infrastructures so that when times get tough, we can help each other out and nobody will get left behind?
Yeah, I love that. Who's in your kit? Stacey, when you think about community housing here, particularly where we are on the territories of the Coast Salish speaking people here and Hookaminim speaking people in the Lower Mainland. I mean, it's fairly dense, right? We're often talking about a multi-story residential, mid-sized to tall towers, or some combination of that along with townhouse communities. How do you see the importance of building those relationships so that people have who they need in their kit and that type of a housing environment? And can you talk a little bit how it might be different than in, a single family neighborhood, perhaps?
Well, there's a couple things that come to mind with that question. I mean, the first is just acknowledging that there really are systemic inequities in terms of who's most at risk with some of these challenges and emergencies that may come our way. And so just acknowledging that, often in some of these housing communities, we have folks with multiple barriers who are disproportionately affected by, impacts of climate change or the things that are coming our way. So it's extra important to invest in building resilience when that's the case. We've been working for a number of years as part of a provincial collective impact initiative called the Hey Neighbor Collective. And it's particularly looking at how do we strengthen social connectedness and resilience in multi-unit housing, and how is that different? So exactly what you're asking about. There's a couple things that I've noticed. One is that, ironically, when people live closer together in high density environments, you'd think they'd be more connected, but that's not always the case. It's quite often the opposite, actually. Often when we're closer together, people are concerned about privacy, maintaining their own space, and they don't necessarily have those connections. Also, in rental environments, we see more transients, more turnover of tenants. And so sometimes those longer term relationships are harder to build. So again, just sort of extra important in investing in that. And then the other is that we always say, our neighbors are our first responders. Like in multi-unit housing, those folks right next door are going to be the ones that we need to turn to in the event of an emergency. So again, having those ties with folks really close to home, I think is extra important.
We've got the specific challenges of a more dense urban environment, and then compounded by marginalization and additional barriers and the disproportionate impact on these very communities of extreme weather events and climate change. I'd like to make this real. So, Alex, I'm hoping, can you tell us just a little bit about, what is the work that you and your team are doing with resilient neighborhoods? Give us some examples of the work that you're doing to help address those barriers in community.
This started specifically with the BRN group almost 2 years ago now. So last spring, we started working together on a pilot project just to encourage this support and tenant resilience. Initially, this was started at 4 of our directly managed sites, so 3 here in the Lower Mainland and 1 in Victoria, that were chosen for that they were in different areas and also different tenant bases at the buildings as well. Some were just seniors, some were a mixture of families and seniors. And the goals were just to find ways to strengthen social connections and encourage tenant engagement, and also a way for us to work more closely with community partners that we already have relationships with and agreements with that work at our sites. So we really wanted to take this like kind of holistic approach of all of us working together, all of the building staff with our tenants, just to encourage that participation in programming. And from that, this tenant engagement team that was already somewhat in the works was born. And now these 5 staff, 4 in the Lower Mainland and 1 in Victoria, have really taken on what was started with this pilot project and have continued, and it's grown even more. So we've done quite a bit, even just looking back in preparation for this, all of the work that's been done, all of the different sessions that we've done in the past year and a half, but a lot around, and I think Stacey can probably add to it, a lot of dialogue sessions with our tenants. So just talking about even like, what does it look like to be prepared, or what would be an emergency, just to kind of get folks thinking. Stacey and her team do really excellent work around specifically Connect and Prepare and the course that they have with that. So we were able to use some of that information with the tenants. At one site in particular, they were super keen. So we've started kind of almost like a little mini project within the project. They're called floor connectors. They were a site that experienced a fire. So I think they were more interested in knowing how they can protect themselves and be prepared. So those tenants have kind of stepped up to volunteer and help support their neighbors. We've also done big group sessions of all of the site staff, or most of them, like property manager, building managers, our community partners, our housing and health services staff, coming together a few times a year to talk about this work and see what's working, what can we do better, what are some future ideas that now that we're seeing when we're on site more doing this, what would be beneficial for our tenants. So that's kind of in a nutshell, but I don't know if Stacey wants to add on any more too.
Yeah, Stacey, what are you seeing from it? I mean, it was a pilot project. So what do you think the successes were?
Yeah, I mean, I think the successes were many, and I'll speak to some of the successes with tenants, but actually I think one of the pieces that was really successful was actually carrying out the project in a really collaborative way across departments within BC Housing and with community partners. So that in and of itself was actually sort of modeling resilience in a way, and those strengthened relationships and working together and having sort of getting on the same page about common goals around tenant resilience and engagement, I think was huge. And then in terms of the tenants themselves, I think, one of the core goals was around strengthening social connections, and the community partners and BC Housing staff hosted so many activities and events that really, brought people out and gave them a chance. We're very intentional about giving people a chance to build those connections. The examples that Alex shared about the community dialogues, it was going deeper than just showing up for an event, but really sharing meals together and being in conversation together, understanding what my neighbor cares about. And maybe that's some of the same things I care about. So I think that really made a difference in terms of strengthening relationships that hopefully will be lasting. And often out of those, we see these sort of informal ripples. Someone meets over a conversation and a meal, and then they learn, maybe they need help getting groceries, or who knows what it is. So we've certainly seen lots of those informal ripples of support. And then I think, what we really tried to emphasize throughout the pilot project, was using these gatherings or these activities to really strengthen tenant leadership and provide opportunities for tenants themselves to step into being contributors in their community. And I think the process of being engaged in community itself is very resilience building. So the floor connectors example that Alex shared is one of my favorite. We just had a conversation with many of them last week. And what stood out to me was, they've made a huge difference in their building. They've engaged their neighbors around emergency preparedness. They did this incredible project where they got small grants to put together grab and go emergency kits for their neighbors and many of the tenants in the building. But the act of doing that together, having a shared goal, doing a project together, it really increased their confidence and their connections. And so many of them shared that they actually felt isolated prior to participating in this. And this gave them an avenue and a way to get more connected in community and really be a contributor. So that really stands out to me as some of the elements of success.
Yeah, and to build on that, Stacey, I mean, you're talking about the ripple effect. What would you how do you explain the importance of that ripple effect, right? If you're talking to a big organization like BC Housing and you're saying, hey, listen, we want to invest taxpayer dollars in this. Why does that matter? What's your pitch?
Well, I would say it's life-saving, actually. Honestly, if one connection is made for someone that a neighbor knows to check in on them in a big event, that could save someone's life. So I think it actually is so important. And there's so many ways we may not even be able to recognize how that can make a difference.
That's beautiful. Alex, I mean, Stacey's mentioned some of the projects you had. You've mentioned the pilot sites, and we know that some of those sites are also where people have experienced fires, also extreme heat, impacts of wildfire smoke. If you take a look ahead, certainly we know that there's some really challenging trend lines impacting not just BC Housing buildings, but right across, even in the private market housing, not just community housing, right? Around some of those challenges. What do you see ahead for this type of programming in housing buildings, given the trends that we're seeing in the environment?
And my hope is that it continues and it grows. Like, we're already seeing such good results, in my opinion, just from the past year and a half. And tenants were already, I think they were already feeling certain ways. And this is just kind of let them kind of name it and have work to do associated with it. Like, even from the start, we heard a lot of tenants, when we would talk about emergency preparedness or similar events, they were always more concerned about their neighbors or pets than they were about themselves generally. So I think this is just like, okay, my neighbors feel that way too. It's not just me concerned about somebody, but we're all kind of feeling like that. So let's kind of get together. So I feel like we're creating this kind of, I think it's Stacey's term, or I'm taking it from her, but that social infrastructure that's in place. So we're trying to make our physical buildings safer, more resilient, but also the people who are living in them the same. And we've just seen, I think, tenants start to realize that they already do have some of these skills and assets that they can bring, which they maybe just didn't realize or didn't have the confidence in themselves to come forward with it before. But now that's starting. And I think when other tenants see that, they're more likely to step up and even just to join in. Not that they have to necessarily take on a leadership role, but maybe they'd come out to the lunch next time, or they'd participate in that next fire drill. And I agree with Stacey. It's definitely life-saving. Like, these fire drills and info sessions are important. being prepared for an earthquake is important. And I think having recent events has shown people that too, with recent earthquakes on the island. We've even seen smaller scale things like a power outage. Those tenants who received the grab and go kits at the building were using their flashlights already that they got in the kits. And like it's already being put into practice. So my hope is that this just like grows and expands. And maybe in a few years, we'll have double the TEWs so that they can do more work and reach more tenants, especially across the province, not just focused here in the Lower Mainland and Victoria, because it's needed everywhere. So that's my hope.
Yeah. And Stacey, what do you see in the future for resilient communities? What do you think resilience looks like?
What I'm seeing, we've worked on these issues for many, many years. And when we first started community resilience, nobody even really had a sense of what that meant or why that was important. And I think so many people are waking up to why it is important, given the challenges we're facing. And what I hope is that, organizations like BC Housing keep investing in this type of work and recognizing just how critical it is. Kudos to BC Housing for actually dedicating staff positions to work collaboratively with others to make this a priority. I hope that continues and grows. And I also hope that, this was a small pilot. Now it's growing within BC Housing's directly managed sites. I hope that this type of work can spread to other nonprofit housing, and that it just becomes the way of business, that this is part of what it means to live in multi-unit housing and social housing in BC.
That's a really good place to leave us with a positive view of the future. Really excited to continue to see what comes out of these projects and the collaboration together. Stacey, Alex, thank you so much for joining us here. Let's talk again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.